Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're glad that you all are here and able to join us today. For those that haven't had a chance to join us for one of these chats in the past, sort of the way these came about is that, over the spring, we didn't get to have any of the normal workshops and conferences that we usually do. And those are our opportunities to try and encourage all of our students to go, not just to present research and that sort of thing, but also get to meet professional geographers and learn about different career paths, graduate school opportunities, that sort of thing. And since the students didn't get to do that this year, we decided we would bring the professional geographers to them. And so Nathan has been working with me over the summer and now the fall, and we've been hosting a whole series of these, inviting people in to share sort of their expertise with what they do. And so we're really excited that you all are here with us today, especially with all the Zoom fatigue that's going on. The sessions are very, very informal. If you have a question and Lauren doesn't mind, you just feel free to unmute yourself at any time. I'll also do my best to keep an eye on the chat. So if you don't feel comfortable speaking, but you'd rather put the question in there, I'll keep an eye on it. And then we'll take lots of breaks throughout. So if there's a time you want to interject with a question and you don't feel comfortable interrupting, by all means, please do that. So today we are joined by Lauryn Bragg from Oak Ridge National Lab. So Lauren, thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day to be here.
Of course.
So Lauren, let's get started a little bit with your background. So you work as a research associate with the Human Dynamics team, and lots of us with, let's say, geography backgrounds, especially at UT, when we think about the National Lab and the work that goes on there, we always think about things like GIS or remote sensing, statistics and programming and that sort of stuff. And you're coming into this with a completely different background. So can you kind of give us the story on your background and then how it is that you found yourself there at the lab?
Yes. So I actually moved to Knoxville from South Carolina in 2006. My dad and stepmom lived there in Knoxville. So I moved there to go to college. I went to Pellissippi first. So I started out in the community college scene, and that's where anthropology found me, I will say. Because ever since I was a kid, I loved other cultures. I loved traveling. I loved just learning. I mean, as a kid, I had a book on the cultural atlas. So what kid has that, right? So it was at Pellissippi that I found cultural anthropology. It was an elective because I went in as a journalism major. And I've been published and everything with my high school or whatever. So I wanted to be a journalist major. And then I guess 3 changes of my major later, I I took a intro to cultural anthropology class as an elective and just fell in love. I knew that was it. So I pursued the rest of my anthropology. So all my intro classes I did at Pellissippi. And then when I went to UT, as I was telling Michael earlier, I freaked out and I changed my major to communications, which was a horrible decision.
Not that we're saying there's anything wrong with communication.
No, it was really interesting, just not my thing. So I was basically told by my advisor to switch back to anthropology, and he didn't have to tell me twice. So I went back that day, switched my major back, and I never looked back. So during my time at UT, I focused mostly on biological and cultural anthropology. And
can you explain those two for lay people like myself who don't have a background in anthropology?
So biological anthropology basically covers stuff like human evolution. So I took classes like human paleontology, which discusses all of our ancestry. I had to learn all of the ancestors, Australopithecines, all these words I'm not going to even try to say. And then I also took, I'm blanking. The class, you learn all the bones.
Like A and P or something?
Oh, osteology. That's what I did. Yes, thank you. I did osteology. And then I mostly did cultural because it was my thing. And one of my professors is here. Dr. Pendry. I took, anthropology theory. I did migration and transnationalism, which is one of my favorites. So basically, I wanted to learn more about how cultures are being affected by globalization, by climate change, basically, just by a lot of these factors that a lot of times cultures die out because of this, and how to preserve that, how to preserve their language, their customs, everything. So.
All right, so let me back up for just a second. So when you were an undergrad and you were working on your anthropology degree and you decided to switch over to communications, you said, and I quote, I freaked out. Can you describe what it was that you freaked out about?
My family was freaking me out, as they normally do, right? When I told them that when I came home from my first anthropology class or whatever, I decided to switch my major to anthropology. So I went home and my stepmom was like, well, as long as you don't change your major to anthropology. I went, I did. So what freaked me out was I had all these people in my ear, saying, well, if you don't want to teach, what are you going to do? If you don't want to go do archaeology, what are you going to do? So I thought, what am I going to do? So that's why I freaked out.
Okay. I think we get a lot of that also from families here in the geography department. And bless his heart, one of our undergrads who just finished up in the spring had done like an internship every year and all these cool research opportunities. And it was like it was never enough for his family to like feel validated that he was on the right track. So yeah, we hear that a lot too. So, all right. So you finished up this background in anthropology, working there at UT. So how did you make the jump from sort of being a professional student from the undergraduate level to working as a researcher at the lab?
So I graduated actually in 2012 from UT. And I also, along with my anthropology classes, I did a lot of religious studies classes. So I was actually one class away from having a religious studies minor, and I do kind of regret not finishing that part, but I was kind of done by then. So when I graduated, I was still working at Barnes & Noble, and then I ended up getting a job working at this family-owned 401k company because I needed a job, right? So not even knowing that the lab was an option, I still thought all they did was chemistry and sciencey stuff, hard sciencey stuff. So I did the 401k thing for a couple years, and I actually had a friend that I worked with at Barnes & Noble whose wife worked at the lab. And I met up with them one night because he was in a band with some of the people at ORNL, and she was there, and she said, you know what? I've been meaning to talk to my boss about you. Let me talk to her tomorrow. And so in 2014, September of 2014, I started at ORNL.
Nice.
Yeah.
We sometimes we hear that phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Mm-hmm.
When we were doing our little career coaching sessions this summer, one of the people that we interviewed for that said, it's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Yeah.
And that way they can start to find ways to make those connections. And it sounds like that was like the prime example of that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So have you been then with that Human Dynamics team the whole time you've been there at the lab?
Yes. So we were actually the GIST group, Geographic Information Science and Technology group. And I think, if I'm right, Sarah, a couple years ago, we became a directorate, which is National Security's Emerging Technologies, and then Human Dynamics came out of that. And so the project I work on, which is population density tables, is underneath that umbrella of Human Dynamics.
So, all right, let me pause for a minute and let me go back to this grid view real quick. And I've been asking all the questions. Does anybody else have any questions they want to chime in with before I keep going?
I do have things to show people, so they might have questions later.
Okay. Well, then tell us a little bit, if you don't mind, then about the Human Dynamics. All right, what's the right vocabulary word? Team? Group? Okay.
Yes.
And so then at a high level, what does your group work on?
So I don't know. So I'm assuming everybody's heard of LandScan. So
You better explain that just in case.
I probably shouldn't have said anything then. So I guess blanketed, and I might need some help from some of the team members. Blanketed, it's basically where people are at a certain time. So during the day, how many people are at work or at school or, whatever. Where are they at night? What certain cities, are different than others. And, like small towns of 5,000 people would be totally different. So I guess it's kind of like the blanket term for LandScan, kind of what they do.
And if I understand correctly, it's also a global data set.
Yes, so there's LandScan Global and then LandScan HD. And I helped out a little bit with LandScan Global a few months ago doing demographics for them.
All right. Okay, we won't put you on the spot anymore for LandScan. Sorry, so there's the LandScan group or project that's going on, and what other cool things are y'all doing?
So there's also a group called PlanetSense who looks at social media data for points of interest, and that's a pretty cool thing that they do. Basically, they just look, I don't know if they still do Facebook. I know Facebook put in a lot of restrictions. They used to do Facebook, but I know they do Twitter mostly.
We've had a lot of our graduate students who have done research associated with mining social media data.
Yeah, and it's a wealth of information because we actually use some of what PlanetSense finds, and it's really useful. And then there's, of course, PDT, which is just population density at the building level, and I can get into more of that later. And then World Stamp, which Robert Stewart heads. I haven't played with that too much, but I know they do a lot of like census and demographic type stuff, and it's pretty cool.
All right. Well, let's get into PDT. Tell us all about this, because I don't think I know anything about this at all.
So I do have a couple of examples I can show people because it's easier to see, I guess you can say, than it is to me to sit here and talk about it.
Yeah, go right ahead. You should have the ability to share a screen.
Let's see.
And then this is where we have that awkward Zoom moment where everybody's like, "Can you see my screen now?"
Right. I'm gonna make sure. Let's see. We don't need that. Okay. There, that's what I want everyone to see, I'm assuming.
Bangladesh.
Yeah. Can everybody see it? Let's see. Maybe this one I want. Oh no, I want the whole screen. Maybe we should have done this earlier.
Like I said, these things are super informal, so.
Can you see the whole thing?
So right now, in the background, I can see what looks like Excel. And then in the foreground, I can see what looks to be kind of like a web browser or something. And something about Bangladesh, and oh, there's a cemetery.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. I had this in order and I was like, please don't mess up. So, okay. Basically, population density tables is a project that was started about 10 years ago that captures population density at the building level. So we have over 55 facility types, and it's also a learning system, so a Bayesian model. So the more reports that we put in, I guess you could say more refined our numbers get. But every country gets a baseline estimate until we're able to start putting in more data, and that becomes more refined.
So let me pause for just a second, Lauren. Pretend, and don't actually pretend that I don't know what the purpose of a population density table is. Can you kind of walk me through, like, I literally have no idea what that is?
So I guess you could say we capture this sort of data to see how buildings are used. So for example, if I were to be looking at, this school in Mali, I would find all the data that I could, students, teachers, cultural data, which is mostly what I do, is find the cultural side of things. How many people would we expect there to, be, how many people are expected to be there at night versus the day, and all that kind of stuff. And it's used a lot for people who are like needing this kind of data.
Are you allowed to tell us who those, not necessarily who they are, but like anything about the people that want this kind of data?
Not
No.
Really. No, Sarah's like, no, Zach.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I was just curious.
Which I already know, but it is used, I know, like for disaster type relief too and stuff. So
okay.
So can I jump in here, Lauren?
Yeah.
So generally speaking, it can be applied to building outlines or land use data to kind of give us a general idea of how many people are expected to be in an area.
Mm-hmm.
So
Gotcha.
You'll have, as I'm sure she's going to go on to, a specific number of people per 1,000 square feet for, say, a cemetery. So then you can outline the cemetery and apply that number to the size of the cemetery and get an idea of how many people are going to be there in the day and how many people are going to be there at night.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so, Lauren, what are some of the sources that you're using to get all this information? Because I imagine that we don't have the same rich, like, census data that we are accustomed to having here in the US.
Right. So all of this is open source data. So when I do my talks at AAG, I basically tell people we're professional Googlers because that's what we do. We Google like the name of the school. So sometimes there's different ways of going about how to find this kind of data. Sometimes I'll just hop on Google Maps and just kind of start moving around. We use Wikimapia, anything open source we use. And to tell you, it's a miracle if you find information all at once on a website. Mm-hmm. It's few and far between, which is where the cultural stuff comes in. And that's how I apply it to cemeteries. And cemeteries is a different kind of thing because it's not a building, right? It's open space. So a lot of the cultural data that I try to find helps if we can't find certain information. If that makes sense.
If I understand what you're saying about the cemeteries, right, and there's a good chance I don't. So the idea almost there is you're kind of working backwards. Like, how how many people are buried here within a certain area, and then you're working that backwards?
No, we don't know.
Ah, okay.
No, so I'll show you this. So like for this cemetery, I found it. So it's easy to find a cemetery, right? So what we never know is how many graves, unless it's told to us, which is rare. So we always have to find number of graves and the size, so meters squared, feet squared, whatever, of the whole cemetery. So what I do with this project for right now is we take the area of the whole cemetery and then I take samples to kind of get an estimate of the number of graves. Now, right now, it's still in the works because this project is still ongoing. It's been ongoing for 2 years now. But right now, we are working on a counting tool that will help us automatically count the graves in here. So that's still kind of in the works, but it's way more in depth than you think it is when it comes to finding this information.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all. It can be hard enough to find like where the local food truck is going to be, and they have a Facebook account.
Yeah. And like in a place like Mali, you're not going to get that. It's you pretty much have to dig deeply, and sometimes it'll take days. And if you can't find one piece of information, you pretty much can't make a report out of that. So
then from a workflow standpoint, you identify one of these physical features on the landscape, then you collect data, all sorts of different data about this particular physical feature. So it could be a cemetery, it could be a building of some kind. What happens to that next?
Oh, so
Or if we don't want to talk about that, that's fine too.
oh no. So this is basically a report that I'm working on. And I'll show you how I kind of build it. This is kind of how I build it. So we choose what the facility type is, and then we add in all of our sources. And of course, if we have everything needed, we put it all in, and then it generates a number. And this number, I believe, you guys might know a little more, is used in the deliverables, or at least the models are used for the deliverables. So like when I said earlier, the more you put in, the more refined the numbers get. That's why it's so important to constantly put in reports.
Okay.
That answered your question.
Yeah. So then, and you're doing this, you're like a cemetery researcher for the whole world. Like that's your job right now?
Yeah. So my mentor came up to me 2 years ago and said, hey, so we're being asked about cemeteries, and I know you would love this.
I love that you have that reputation.
Yes, right? And so I said, you're totally right. So a couple years ago, this whole project started. And since then, we've made new formulas. We've kind of refined how we search for things. I do write-ups every time I find, so anytime I find a report for any facility type, I try to do a cultural write-up to attach, so that whoever's using it understands what's going on culturally, because it's very important for PDT.
So now I'm just so curious about, I've never talked to a cemetery expert before, especially one with like global knowledge. Like, are there some idiosyncratic things about cemeteries that lay people just don't get, especially if we're thinking about cemeteries in different parts of the world?
Well,
or like, is a cemetery a cemetery?
No, actually, it's not. What's interesting is from our research, we have found that a lot of cemeteries are used as public parks. So I think in Seoul, the Seoul National Cemetery is a huge tourist destination, and it's also classified as a park. And so that's another thing we have to think about is, well, do we classify this as a cemetery or do we classify it as a park? And a lot of times we kind of make two reports, one for a cemetery, one for a park, depending on how it's used. And then in like Iran, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, they use cemeteries as places for being social, you know, and selling stuff. And because they tend to go and clean their graves off with water. So they have people in these cemeteries selling water to wash off your grave with, your family's grave with. So, and a lot of times they're there just for social encounters to talk. So it's been really interesting, you know, getting into this kind of work to see how cemeteries are really used compared to here, you know?
Do you
Yeah.
mind if I jump in and ask something?
Yes.
So I did my dissertation on a cemetery in Brazil, and it's a cemetery that's also used as a cultural heritage festival site.
Right.
A cemetery where some Confederate soldiers who fled the Civil War are buried, and where there's this Confederate festival there every year. So I was just curious, like, if you, oh yeah, you have one pulled up that looks.
Is it that one?
It's not. That's not
Okay.
it. But the name is really similar. It's called Cemitério do Campo. But
Yeah,
it
looks like this. Oh, sorry. It's taking forever. Sorry. Oh, there we go.
No, that's okay. I was just curious, like, how you would file your report. Would you generate multiple reports about the festival site and the cemetery site, or like how would that go?
So, yeah, we would put in a report for a cemetery. So how is it used as a cemetery? And two, we also look at whether the cemetery is still active, if that makes sense. So are there still active burials happening, or is it full? So if it's full, we kind of look at it a little differently. We just say, hey, the cemetery is full. You know, there's no active funerals going on, but they might do, you know, holiday visitations or whatnot. And then in that case, with festivals, we're still trying to figure out the festival stuff. A lot of times we would put that in as like an episodic. number because that's just one snapshot in time. But we're trying to figure out how we can easily, like, more, I don't want to say accurately capture it, but to, you know, say, hey, this is a holiday. This is what's going on. And I think we're trying to get there with the new formulas and stuff too, but it's really hard sometimes to capture everything just because this is such a dynamic, you know, culture is so dynamic, you know, it's hard to capture everything. But with I've been trying to get the festivals things for a long time, and it's just hard.
Totally. Yeah, I get that. It's also something that only happens like once a year as well, right? And most of the rest of the year, the cemetery is closed off and you have to book a visit in advance. And like, there's hardly anybody who gets buried there anymore or really visits much. So
yeah, and I think in that situation we would put it in episodic for now, just because it is that one snapshot in time.
So it sounds like we want to make sure you have long-term job security. We just need to start generating random parties, street markets, etc., and host them at cemeteries all over the place. And then you'll never be able to be finished with this project.
We'll be like, why?
Well, let me just pause and then see if anybody else has questions. Oh, refugee camps. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry, everybody can see that. But that's okay. Yeah, so refugee camps in cemeteries. So I found that in South Sudan, in the Juba Cemetery. You can, let me see if I can find it. I know it's in the published. It's really interesting to look at. Here it is. So I actually put this one in, no, it's not that one. I actually put this one in as a cemetery, or as a cemetery and also as a refugee camp. Sarah, what's happening with everything?
It's the curse of live demos.
I think so. Let's see. But anyway, so you can clearly see that there are structures that are obviously not graves. And when I dug into it a little bit more, which I already kind of knew it was a refugee camp just because of, you know, the situation in South Sudan. But come to find out that a lot of these refugees are internally displaced. So they fled from more rural areas into Juba seeking help from the government. And the government's not doing anything for them. So they ended up camping out in this cemetery because it's the only place they could find that nobody would kick them out, basically. And they've been there for a few years. And I wish I could find, it's really interesting to look at. I might have taken it out. Because a lot of the cemeteries I've taken out to like redo.
Yeah, because it sounds like it's one of those things that will, as you learn something new, then you have to go back and rework on your report every time you learn some new piece.
Every time. But that's the fun of it, to be honest. I love it. But I wish I could find it because it was really interesting. I know it was the Juba Cemetery.
Well, Lauren, while you're looking, I'm just curious, do you think that you might happen to have the cemetery where I did my dissertation research in your system, or do you have any idea if you might?
Which is it?
I'm curious. It's called the Cemitério do Campo. It's located in the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Kind of
probably not, because the only one I have from Brazil right now in the system is this one.
Okay, gotcha.
And I showed you. Now we do have a whole, so Sarah and I have created a Excel spreadsheet of all the cemeteries we have found so far that we need to work on. So cool. It will be in that list.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I just downloaded your dissertation on it, Jordan. So you can
really?
We're gonna capture some of that data if you don't mind.
Absolutely, that's what it's there for.
Thank
we'll
you.
Make sure it gets in. I've got it. I'll send it to you, Lauren.
Thank you. So that's the other kind of information we find. We find dissertations, everything. So here it is. Here's the cemetery I'm talking about. So I put it in as a refugee camp and as a cemetery, and I digitized it different because of how it's used. So if you can see here, this is a refugee camp. Right there and right here. And so I put that in as a refugee camp. And then as a cemetery, what I did is I digitized the whole thing. Takes forever, sorry. There we go. And another fun thing about doing this job is my mentor was looking at this and she said, well, that bottom little strip right there, is that even part of the cemetery? I said, yes, and I can prove it. And she said, all right, do it. And so I knew just from reports that I read that this was the Christian cemetery and this is the Muslim cemetery, but I had to prove it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I found that there's a hotel right here and somebody had taken a photo outside their hotel window into this cemetery that matched up with the report that I found that this was a Muslim cemetery. And you could see the little, they weren't gravestones, they were just little plaques. You could see that in the photo, and I matched the buildings in the background with that report. So that's the level of
dedication
and just, when you've been at this for 6 years, that's just, it's just second nature after that. You find ways to prove what is what. And there's times I can look at a photo of a school with no coordinates given, and I can find it on Google Maps because of the shape of the roof. So.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that back in the days when we could all travel, that your vacations were set up to go find unique cemeteries, right? Is this your hobby outside of work?
Well, what's funny is my husband and I liked going to cemeteries just to visit them anyway. And because he just likes the history. He likes the old gravestones. He likes the history. And then when we were in Scotland on our honeymoon, we went to some cemeteries and it was pretty cool.
You were just destined for this.
I think. And it's once you've worked on PDT for as long as I have, anytime you visit anywhere, you're like, wow, I bet such and such, so many people could fit in this space,
Nice. Well, here, let me go back here and check and see, because we're getting short on time. So I just want to see if anybody else has any other questions. So feel free to unmute yourself and chime in if you've got questions. So Lauren, it sounds like then, so most of your time then is working on the PDTs, and then the cemeteries are part of that PDT project.
Yes.
Okay.
I've worked on multiple projects. So the one you see now, I worked on my second and third year working on the project. I started working in manufacturing, one of the facility types, and I worked in Bangladesh and presented this at two AAGs, and then my cemetery stuff I've presented at 2 AAGs too. And I forgot to mention my first AAG project, or my first project done at PDT that I presented at AAG, was a project that I partnered with a team of archaeologists who were working at Machu Picchu to preserve. They were trying to do studies on how to preserve, the site, but still allow visitors to show up, to come visit. And so me and another guy at the lab helped create basically a visitor flow model that showed where people would go. And it was pretty cool. That was a pretty cool project. And then this project was interesting because I was able to see patterns of school attendance rising in rural areas because of this project that I did with manufacturing. Because a lot of workers in the manufacturing sector are women, mostly from rural areas. And the money they make goes back to their families in the rural areas. And I saw that in our demographics, rural school attendance was higher than urban, which is usually kind of not, you don't really see that. At least I haven't seen that since working on this project. So I thought, well, why is rural higher than urban, you know? So I looked into it, and it was because of the remittances going back was helping their families send their other siblings to school.
Yeah, we often hear culturally, and I'm sure this is going to make just too broad sweeping generalization, but the more empowered women are in their households and their communities, you know, the stronger options there are for education for their children and all that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised to have learned that, but I never would have thought to put those two together.
Yeah, and what was cool and what we were talking about earlier is, you know, GIS, I love it with, you know, using it in anthropology because it helps me to see those patterns instead of seeing like a number. You know, it's like not, you know, I like to see it visually, and GIS helps me do that. And that's when I was like, oh, why is it darker here, you know, or something. And then I went and looked at the numbers. So it was pretty cool.
Well, Lauren, we're down to about 5 minutes left. Is there anything else you had pulled up here that you wanted to show us that we didn't get to? Because if not, I am gonna, now that you brought it up, I'm gonna ask you a GIS question.
I think I'm done.
All right. So tell me then, you've got this background in anthropology, you've been doing all this population work, all this cultural work, but you went and earned a certificate, a graduate certificate, if I'm understanding correctly, in GIS. So what was the driver for you that made you think that was worthwhile to go back and pursue?
I just really liked how I could use GIS as a tool to, I guess, enhance my cultural background, I guess you could say. Like what I was talking about, it does help when you're trying to visualize the changes in culture and the changes in just, you know, language, or where they're moving to, where they're forced to move to, or the changes in, you know, their practices even. So I feel like GIS helps others and myself to understand visually what's happening rather than looking at a spreadsheet, you know, because sometimes you can get, you know, spreadsheets you can get lost in.
Yeah. So have there been new opportunities that have opened up either, you know, work-wise or research-wise, now that you've got the GIS background to complement your other cultural background?
Well, I am waiting placement at NGA right now. And that's been like 2 years.
Congrats. That's awesome.
So I'm almost giving up on them.
So, Lauren, for those who don't know that acronym, NGA stands for?
National Geospatial Intelligence Agency.
So there's an I in there that they forgot.
Yeah, well, they do so geospatial and intelligence are hyphenated.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, I'm waiting placement for them and the human geography group, department, whatever it is. And then I've also applied to their analysis directorate too, because I have a friend who works in that directorate, so.
Very good.
But well, Corona didn't help anything, so.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Well, let me pause here because we've got just a couple minutes left, and open it back up one more time for anybody else that's got questions. So, Lauren, we have quite a few young people within the department that that are not interested in the geospatial side of things. They're interested in the physical and the cultural side of geography. So if there was a student coming up with your similar interests and they wanted to follow in a similar career path through a federal agency, or, you know, like you're doing with the lab or the intelligence world, is there some recommended things they should be thinking about and doing in order to see themselves be as successful as you are?
I would definitely say, even if you're not interested in the GIS side, at least have a basic understanding of GIS. At least know how to open the program and digitize. That's usually all our mentor asks for is, can you open it? Okay, cool, you know? So when it comes to PDT, yeah, just have a general basic GIS knowledge. And our mentor, Marie Urban, she's always looking for people with, you know, human geography backgrounds, anthropology backgrounds. I think there's like, what, 4 anthropologists now on the team? Yeah. So, and then my sister has a background in linguistics. So that helps when it comes to searching for, you know, information where something isn't usually translatable. She searches for it in the language and finds information, and we're like, whoa, you know. So I think just having a basic GIS background is sufficient for the PDT project, at least.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in human dynamics, it depends on where they're wanting to work. It might be more heavy in geospatial background and coding, but for PDT, it's mostly cultural based.
Can I also tag in?
Yes.
And just say, just a general awareness of what's going on in the world, keeping up with news, keeping up with where things are happening, where interest is going to be focused, where requests might be made. Because it's, if you're already on the ground running, you know what's going on. It's a lot easier to jump in and do what you need to do.
Definitely.
Is a huge help.
Yeah, and this project forces you to kind of do that too, to keep up with everything. But it's important to have that desire, I guess you could say, to keep up with everything and that passion, like what we do. And I did forget to mention that we actually have a couple papers coming out on the cemetery stuff. So keep an eye out for those.
Yeah, send those our way, and we'd be happy to share those within the department. So we are right at 5:15, Lauren, and we want to be respectful of your time. If students, faculty, staff, graduate students wanted to reach out for you for more information, is it okay if they reach out to you via the email that you shared with me?
Oh, definitely, yes.
All right. And then I am trying to encourage our undergraduate students to be a little more active on LinkedIn. Is that also okay if they reach out to you there?
Yes, definitely.
All right. Does anybody have any other closing questions before we let Lauren get back to her day?
I don't think so, but thank you so much, Lauren. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Have a great rest of your day, and we really appreciate you spending your time with us.
Of course, and thanks everybody for showing up.
Thanks for hosting. This is great.
Bye, Deanne.